Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to a little bit of a spoiler review, this time without camera. And honestly, without much effort at all put into this, I'm kind of lazy when it comes to stuff like this. So I'm also very uncreative. I can make nice presentations and do all sorts of effects, but I really don't know how to do those things. And I don't feel much, you know, yeah, I'm just too lazy to get into that stuff. So what we're gonna do, because I think some of you are interested in this, is just talk about some of the standout cards, some of the interesting ones out of the new sets, and I'm gonna give you my perspective on those, mostly focused on constructed, not really about limited. There's lots of other people who do limited stuff anyways. So yeah, I'm gonna tell you, which format I think this might fit in, or why it's overrated, why it's underrated, and yeah, we'll just see how this goes. All right, guys. Let's start with the 3 mana 2/4 here. Oh, no, sorry, already going wrong. 3 mana 2/2. Okay, that's a bit worse. Creatures you control with power 2 or less can be blocked by creatures with power 3 or greater. Okay, so it gives you a small boy's unblockability, can push damage. That's kind of decent. And if an ability of a creature you control with power 2 or less triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. Interesting, interesting. So yeah, I mean, what comes to mind immediately is Novice Inspector, which is the new Frame Inspector, basically the same card, which triggers and gives you 2 clues. I mean, those 2 cards work hand in hand together. I'm really not happy about the stat lines on this. In white, Adeline is a point of comparison, and just 4 toughness is so much better than a 2/2 that just dies to cut down, and like even shock effects and what have you. Even though red is not really a popular color, the power on this thing is very low. So the synergy, especially with the second ability of things double triggering, that is something that could be exploited in a good way. But even then, it just seems too easily disruptible, especially considering that black is so prevalent in the format, and a deck like that would also succumb to certain sideboard cards like Glistening Deluge or Path of Peril. As you can tell, I'm really only focusing on standard because I don't see this card outside of standard. There might be something in Pioneer or Explorer, maybe, but usually you can, like, looking at this type of stuff, like, it's usually not the case that there's something playable there. So yeah, I think this card won't see much constructed play besides like a corner case deck, and I'm sure people will try to brew around with it, but yeah, not very good. Intrude on the Mind. This is a card right up my alley. A free blue instant. Reveal the top 5 and separate them into 2 piles. So you choose the piles, and then an opponent chooses one of those piles. So the opponent in the end gets to choose if you get that. Like if you're looking for example, Sunfall or some removal or something specific, in the end your opponent will decide if you get it or not. But you can of course always put the card that has higher worth in a certain game state in the pile that has fewer cards. And then you will be rewarded with a flying Thopter creature that is as big as the cards that you put into your graveyard. Yeah, so if you take more cards, you get a 2/2. If you take less cards, you get a 3/3, or I mean, sometimes might even be a 1/4 split, although that is going to be very unlikely. It's certainly a very powerful instant. Also, a thing that is very nice to flash back. Torrential Yelk, I guess, comes to mind in Pioneer. You could play this maybe as a one-off in the creativity list, but yeah, I mean, it's very corner case. So the question really is, how good is this going to play out in standard? We have Memory Deluge as the premier card advantage spell, and I don't think that will change. This sort of competes with Silver Scrutiny, perhaps. I think it might be stronger than Silver Scrutiny due to the fact that you do get a creature. You could theoretically even build a deck that just kills with Intrude on the Mind and some way of getting it back. So you have an extra kill condition. Like, I remember when I played Esper Control in the past, and people would ask me, well, how do you kill with this deck? And I'm like, yeah, there's one Mirrex, and you have Samurai tokens. And they're like, wait, you don't have like a real kill condition? Yeah, I don't think you need it. And Intrude on the Mind would sort of go into that similar realm of being a card that is just already good, and accidentally also something that can win the game, and sort of shorten the time you have to activate Mirex or whatever. So that is decent, and a little bit of a stabilizing effect in a card draw is also not bad. You can compare this to Mole Drifter in a way as well, and this is arguably better than Mole Drifter. But Mole Drifter nevertheless had the ability to be cast for 3 mana, which was very, very huge, and this doesn't have the ability to do that. But on 5 mana, it's a much stronger card, and this card definitely has potential. Standard these days seems very, very efficient, so 5 mana cards don't really have much of a home. We'll have to see if this will find a home. Yeah, it could be like a 2-off or something, maybe in blue control decks. But yeah, it definitely has potential. It's a pretty strong card for 5 mana. Alright, Massacre Girl non-killer, 2 black, that's the Shieldred mana cost. Menace creatures you control have Wither, so they deal damage in the form of -1/-1 counters, throwback to Lorwyn. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, if it summons with less than 1, draw a card. So basically, whenever a creature dies through combat damage, it will die via Wither counters, and then it will have less than 1 toughness, so you get to draw a card. Yeah, I mean, this is mostly, I think, a limited bomb, probably, but not much in constructed. There's too much competition on the 4 mana slot in Airtie and Shieldred, and yeah, this is just a generic, powerful Mythic at 4 mana. It's not particularly exciting. Whenever a creature deals damage, its controller may exile that many cards from the top of the library. Until the end of the next turn, they may play those cards. At 2 red enchantment. This, I don't know. This is a weird one for sure. It could be some sort of combo enabler, maybe with some damage creation. You could do some shenanigans and keep exiling stuff. It also works for both players, so that's a bit weird. I suppose you could see it as a sideboard card against damage spells. Like if you're playing a red creature deck and you're running into a mirror match, that will basically make all their red burn spells absolutely horrendous. And it will also make blocking absolutely, just super weird. Because you get cards, but your opponent also gets cards. So you profit when you have a cheaper deck than your opponent, essentially, and you will be able to cast more spells. So this has to go into a deck with lots of creatures, of course, otherwise it's not worth it. And with lots of cheap spells that you can utilize quickly. Yeah, if there's, I don't see it. I don't have the creativity perhaps to appreciate a card like this. But right now I don't really see it. Maybe there is some sort of weird combo deck with it. That could of course have potential, perhaps. But just as a generic sort of put it into my creature deck type of card to do certain things, it doesn't strike me as doing anything particularly well, because again, both players in creature again, if you're playing it's like an Izzet control deck, then it's going to be good. But because Izzet relies on burn spells to kill creatures, but that is a very corner case that first of all doesn't exist right now in standard. I don't think it, in Pioneer you have Izzet Phoenix, which is sort of that, but I don't know. This just seems way too narrow for an anti-removal sideboard card. You could go with various other cards like Urabrust Forge, for example. In standard is a very powerful card against someone that tries to shoot down your creatures. And this just doesn't strike me as particularly good there. All right, we're going on to color green Mythic here. 1 GG enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, return target land from your graveyard to the battlefield. Pretty simple. Yeah, this is a cool card. Very, very interesting, of course, and probably has a ton of applications in multiple formats. Or at least people would try it, let's say. So we have Crucible of Worlds as a comparison point, which is also down here, of course. You may play lands from your graveyard. This needs you to play the land for your turn. So that will mean that with Crucible, you cannot you cannot further play more lands when you play land from a graveyard if you don't have an effect that lets you play multiple lands. And this goes around that. It lets you play a normal land per turn and keeps ramping you. So that is very, very, very appealing, just as an ability over the Crucible. Sure, you get your land tapped, so you won't be able to use it if it's like a Field of Ruin or Demolition Field. But you do get it basically, and the land drop. So it's quite powerful, I think, in that sense, and it might just even be stronger than Crucible as a card, which is Crucible is a you know, yeah, a very powerful effect, and being stronger than Crucible says a lot. So this could spawn archetypes in itself, because if the format you are playing this in has not many basic lands, you could build a deck around Demolition Field and Field of Ruin, for example, and just keep returning those and just completely obliterating your opponent's mana. Of course, you would have to have ways to defend yourself, so you would have to play it, I don't know, with red, black, or white, supposedly. White works well too because you have Sarah Paragon and Standard, which can also return those lands. And then you could play stuff like Sunfall, I suppose, to sort of buy yourself time. I mean, in the end, going Deep Cavern Bat into Raffine is probably, if we just look at Standard, going to be stronger than your green X Field of Ruin shenanigan deck, which is, it's sad truth for all the brewers that might have gotten excited. But yeah, this is a big card, a stronger effect than Crucible. Of course, not colorless. It is just in green, but often you want to be in green when you use lands anyways. So very cool card that could make a splash, I think, across multiple formats. All right, what else do we have? I mean, some of these big mythics here, they seem rather obvious to me that they're not very interesting to talk about. We have Krenkul's Bust Crusher. That is another card that attacks non-basic lands. So here you basically get a Field of Ruin effect when this enters the battlefield for each player. So you choose for each player, so you can just choose nothing and then it's just a flying trampler for 4. Or you can blow up one of your lands, blow up one of theirs. So it definitely works well with the Reckon that we just looked at. It's an interesting card. I mean, it goes into those type of effects, and it will help, like have more of that. So you get, I guess you could play like a red-green version of that. Notably, it doesn't target, so it also gets rid of a very important card in Pioneer/Explorer, which is Lotus Field. It doesn't target, so it goes around the hexproof from Lotus Field, and you can just blow up Lotus Field with this, which would be absolutely devastating for the Lotus Field player in likely any circumstance. Yeah, so that is something to consider. I'm not sure that makes it like, there's Damping Sphere if you want to attack the Lotus Field combo deck, and Damping Sphere is likely just going to be better and also colorless, so a lot easier to utilize. But the Bust Crusher does that, which is unique, and yeah, just something to point out. We have another one of these Stop ETB abilities. They're always useful. This one has Flash, so it can get people by surprise. Yeah, I mean, it stops various ETB decks. I mean, what comes to mind in Standard? Deep Cavern Bat, Spyglass Theron. What else? Airtie comes to mind. Atraxa, Topiary Stomper, Archangel of Rav. I mean, this thing has applications for sure. It doesn't stop enchantments, so it won't stop Leyline Binding, which is a big one, out of domain. It stops artifacts, but I cannot think of many artifacts in Standard right now that this does something against. But yeah, we already have effects like these in older formats, so I don't feel like it's worth it to talk about that or those in older formats. But I guess, yeah, I mean, Timeless, for example, this doesn't work against Field of the Dead just triggering. Strict Proc, this says permanent. This just says artifacts and creatures. So it doesn't do that, but it has flash. That's pretty damn good actually on an effect like this, because usually when you play like these Hushbringer type cards, your opponent knows about them, and then they see it on the board, right? You have to play that sorcerer speed, and then they can sort of play around it, right? They don't play their Skyclave apparition, to try to kill something because they know that trigger is going to get countered. But when you have 2 mana, they might just still play that card, and then the effect of the card will just be completely nullified. They spent their mana, tempo loss, and then from there it spirals into your direction. So flash is huge. All right, we have a Phoenix here, 3 mana free. When it dies, you may exile it and collect evidence 4. If you do, return Lamplight Phoenix to the battlefield tab. Yeah, yeah, pretty good. The evidence 4 doesn't seem that difficult to achieve, but also not like super easy. Like if you play this on turn 3 on curve, you will likely not have evidence 4 in your graveyard yet if you're playing some sort of red beatdown deck, maybe Gruul, maybe mono red. There's also some stiff competition at the free drop slot. We have Godric, of course, with Squee, we have the Punisher in standard. Like I'm mostly talking about standard. Like this is not a card for older formats. So I don't know. Like maybe it's a thing you can board in grindy matchups. But then again, there's Urabrask Forge, which is an excellent card against removal. Perhaps better than this. So yeah, not very convinced that this will see any play. I guess we could talk about the Analyze the Poland. As an additional cost to cast a spell, you may collect evidence 8. 1 mana, search your library for a basic land. That's the normal version, and then with evidence collected, search your library for a creature or land instead, which is pretty much a copy of Traverse the Ulvenwald with a different restriction. Traverse the Ulvenwald also says the exact same thing, but needs to have Delirium. This needs to have collect evidence 8. And funnily enough, they really work very similar to each other because, to achieve Delirium, you need cards in your graveyard. To achieve the collect evidence 8, you need cards in your graveyard. So early game, it's a land. You can play this and decrease the land size in your deck. Gives you a little bit more consistency in that regard, because in the end, when you draw it later in the game, it will likely be able to collect evidence 8 and be a creature. So gives you flood insurance, as we say. Collect evidence 8 is quite a lot, though this won't be easily enabled early game if you're not very dedicated at putting cards into your graveyard. So if you're putting cards in your graveyard randomly already, because if you're doing these and that, that like mills 2, mills 3, and it still has a decent effect on a creature, like the 2 mana 1/1 that mills 3 cards, you take a land, or you put a 1+1 counter if you didn't take a land, then this effect, won't be enabled for a while, which won't make it good in most cases. So you really have to put in the work to make this good, because evidence 8 is not going to come from itself. And then if you put in the work to make this good, it depends. But you might have to play shitty cards. That's what I'm trying to say. You might have to play shitty cards to enable this, at which point it sort of defeats its purpose again, because you don't want to play like cards that mill yourself necessarily. They have to be good in themselves too, otherwise you have like this pile of things that if you draw things together perfectly, might work out, but if you don't, it doesn't. And the payoff for a creature tutor is really that you also have some very powerful creature that you can maybe combo with. I don't see that in standard right now, honestly. Like, this might be more of a thing in Explorer. You could get Greasefang with it, and Absent Greasefang, you could maybe play it in Amalia combo. But I think in Amalia, there's better cards to play that tutor. In Greasefang, we used to see Traverse the Ulvenwald in the past already. I mean, with Vessel of Nascency, it's quite easy to enable if you play that version. Collect Evidence 8, not that difficult to enable either, though. So it might be actually better than Traverse. You can just exile 1 Paelion from the graveyard, and boom, you have yourself Collect Evidence. So that's neat, but of course, not always you will have the luxury to exile Paelion from your graveyard, because you actually need it in your graveyard. So I don't know, but if you have multiples, I guess you can do so. So yeah, I think this could be a card for Greasefang. And then maybe in older formats, I don't know, with Stitch's Supplier, for example, or something like that. some weird combinations, maybe some dredge deck where you easily get to evidence 8 in like 1 turn, in like Legacy or more. I don't know. This could see play. Likely not. Likely not. As it always is with these spoilers, honestly, like over the years, what I learned is that likely they're overhyped, unlikely that they're underrated. Often people, see new cards and they're like, oh, this could do that and this could do this. Da, 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 da. But yeah, then it turns out that, no, not really. All right, let's go to the gold cards at last. I'm already realizing my voice is getting a little tired from talking so much. Here we have a little neat one, which mainly is in there for Devotion Green. This is 4 green and 1 card, which is very powerful with Nykthos. So you can put this as a leyline into play before the game begins. And with Nykthos, for example, if you play Sunken Citadel on turn 1, and turn 2 Nykthos, you have already 4 mana turn 2 and can drop, I don't know, power play. And if you have 2 of these, you would have 8 mana. So I don't know, guys. Like, this is obviously can happen in Explorer and Pioneer. So when we thought green was out, it comes back in. Gameplay wise, this is horrendous, I think, because this incentivizes if a deck like that, which I'm 100% sure people would try this, just gameplay wise, they will just mulligan into oblivion, or they will sometimes have the complete nuts on turn 7 where they have the Sunken Citadel, they have the Nykthos, and they have like 1 leyline or even 2, and then they can just drop Ugin, on turn 2. That's just a possibility with this card. So it sort of reminds me a little bit of Tybalt's Trickery, right? Like Tybalt's Trickery's decks were usually completely terrible, but when they did its thing, when they found the Ulamog or whatever, they were obviously, busted. So gameplay-wise, absolutely terrible. Okay. Besides that, I mean, this enables Domain by itself. It makes every land make any color, so that's kind of cool for like 5-color decks, maybe Commander or whatever. But yeah, the aspect that with Nykthos, this is just stupid, makes me just not like it so much, let's say. I'm not looking forward to playing against these decks. They might be very inbred and they might have a 40% win rate after all, because like to put a card that literally does jack shit into your deck when you draw it is a big downside. And if you don't have the devotion, like it's gonna be interesting. Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. We'll see. I mean, I don't know about this one. All right, what else do we have? Yeah, this card, 1 UR, collect evidence 6, it becomes an artifact, so you can enable it with collecting evidence. When it attacks, you may cast an instant or sorcery spell from among cards exiled with it. If that spell would be put into your graveyard, put it on the bottom of its library instead. Yeah, interesting, right? Collect evidence 6 to crew it, so you don't necessarily need a small creature to crew it. Yeah, just all in all, I mean, this could be something like for, is it Phoenix or whatever, you could think about it, but I think there's better effects for this in this department of mana. And like, you also have to pay for the spell, and it works with the graveyard. And when you play a deck like Is It Phoenix, post board, like this is not a main deck card, definitely not. Post board, your opponent will attack the graveyard likely, and this works with the graveyard, so it's not really a useful sideboard card. You rather have cards like Crackling Drake, Sahili, Fable that don't need the graveyard, right? And then like for standard, yeah, I don't know, like it seems a bit expensive. There's not really a home for this type of thing. I think if you want to build a blue-red spell deck, it's going to be Haughty for sure on the 3 mana slot, and then like, I don't know, Tolarian Terrors and such. Not sure if this is good enough, really. It's a sweet card, but it doesn't strike me as particularly good. So don't waste your precious wildcards into Kylox's Wildstrider. For more Massacre Girl Arena financial tips, subscribe here at Arne Huschenbeth. Alright, where is it? No More Lies, the big one. Blue and white, counter target spell unless its controller's pays free. Boom. If that spell is countered this way, exile instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. Mana leak with upside, just a little bit harder to cast, But yeah, this is something I did not think would ever occur or be brought into standard again. Very surprised to see it. Very happy to see it, of course, because as a control player at heart, I couldn't be thrilled more. I have the same feeling as I had when I first saw Teferi Hero of Dominaria, which was just pure joy and like excitement for the time to come. Funnily enough, back then, not many people, at least not the sort of hive mind, thought that Teferi was particularly good. Like they thought it was fine or whatever, but I remember buying it for very relatively cheap. It's soon enough after the release of the card. People realized, had to realize, and it just spiked in price. I remember that. But yeah, with this one, I think everybody is it's pretty obvious that this card is just excellent. So, for example, blue-white control in Explorer will just easily play 4 copies of this. Sorry, make this appear. Your time is over. The ability to exile will come up, especially in the mirror match, where Memory Deluge is a huge card, and No More Lies will make you think twice about casting Memory Deluge at your opponent's end step, perhaps, because it will not feel good to have it countered by this one. So on the one hand, it's very good in blue-white. It's also good against blue-white in a weird way. And then for standard, there's going to be, I assume there's going to be lots of decks who like to play this too. Might be even a resurgence of Esper control or blue-white control. Could see this card seeing play in Esper midrange, Overmake Disappear. Stuff like that. Alright, and last but not least, is there anything else interesting? We get Lightning Helix, that's a big one. A very, very powerful card. The free life it doesn't look like much, but it is a lot actually in any game of Magic. It's a 6 life swing. If you target the face, which can be huge in a racing situation, just gaining 3 life is huge. So this could perhaps spawn a Jeskai control deck, maybe even support some type of deck like that in Explorer. Although looking at standard these days, there is a good amount of free drops this doesn't kill, like the Preacher and the Raffine. So that is, for a 2-drop, not great and not where you want to be. So maybe it's not well positioned for standard these days. There was Assassin's Trophy. This is a card that was very overhyped the last time it got printed. It didn't see much play at all back then in standard, so I don't think it will see much play this time around. Especially in a very tempo-oriented format, as it is right now in standard, giving your opponent an extra land is just not a good idea. Again, this works well together with the Demolition Field of the Ruin plan. If you're playing against Esper midrange and they only have one island or 1 plains as their basic, of course you can just destroy everything and without a downside very early on if you keep on blowing everything up. So that is kind of neat, I guess, in that department for the land destruction fans. But overall, just as a fair card, if you're playing Golgari midrange, you might be playing 1 copy of this, but in many situations, Terra Sunder might just be better, as we see in Timeless as well. People are playing Terra Sunder in Timeless, also due to the fact that the One Ring is indestructible and it excels, but just giving your opponent a land is just so bad, especially on turn 2. You really rather have Go for the Throat cut down in the early game, and even in the mid game, giving your opponent an extra land is pretty bad, so not a great card. Okay, last but not least, I'm going to talk about one card that's going to make a pretty big impact in standard, and that's Long Goodbye. 2-mana kill spell that can't be countered, so it goes around Ward, which is quite important against Graveyard Trespasser and Raffine, of course, and it destroys any creature or planeswalker of mana value 3 or less. Standard is very tempo-oriented. There's the Schooner, there's Raffine, there's 2/4s, there's various creatures, various sizes in the 1 to 3 mana department. So this just hitting everything point blank, can't be countered, doesn't care about ward, is quite good. So Go for the Throat, let's say, has some competition, has some competition. It not killing Shieldred might be an interesting pattern, because like if people start putting too many of these into their deck, Shieldred becomes stronger, so you have to keep a balance. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see like 2 to 3 copies of Long Goodbye, and that's like a healthy amount in your black mid-range decks. Pretty strong card. Alright guys, I didn't put much effort into this. I hope you could still learn something, or you know, were entertained at least a little bit by me looking over some cards. If you have any cards that you really want to know my opinion about, just let me know in the comments, and I will look them over. Might even do another video on the spoilers, or just comment on your comment. Just let me know in the comments, and yeah, let me know if you like this stuff. Usually these type of videos get a lot less views than my normal, you know, content, the normal gameplay stuff. But I mean, in the end, I don't have to put as much work into this, and as you can tell, I didn't put much work into this. And if it's just some of you really like this, I think it's worth it. So I'm just gonna put it out there. All right, guys, thank you so much for listening this time around. I hope to have you next time. You will see me again, I promise. All right, take care, guys.